They called it the flying coffin. Every time those massive bombers lifted off the runway and headed into German skies, there was a quiet understanding among the men aboard. Most wouldn't come back. In 1943, during the height of World War II's air war over Europe, bomber crews of the U.S. Army Air Forces faced terrifying odds. Flak shells burst like black flowers in the sky, fighter planes sliced through formations, and bullets tore through aluminum skins thinner than a soda can. Missions deep into enemy territory could end in seconds. A single hit, and the plane became a fireball. Inside those freezing, deafening bombers, men wore leather jackets, fleece-lined boots, and the thinnest hope that luck would protect them. But luck, as one army surgeon soon realized, wasn't enough. His name was Dr. Malcolm Grow, a quiet, sharp-eyed medical officer stationed with the 8th Air Force in England. He wasn't a fighter pilot, nor a general. He was a doctor. The kind of man who stayed behind, patching up what the war tore apart. But Grow saw something that others ignored. Too many airmen were dying not from direct hits, but from fragments. Every time a bomber limped back to base, riddled with holes, Grow would walk through the wreckage, his medical coat stiff with dried blood. He studied the wounds. Tiny metal shards, flak fragments, shrapnel from the plane itself. Most fatal injuries weren't huge or dramatic. They were small pieces of steel slicing through unprotected flesh. And these fragments were everywhere. He began to wonder, what if something, anything, could stop them? No one in command was asking that question. The official view was simple: bombers were flying fortresses. Heavily armed, heavily armored. Extra protection was unnecessary weight. Pilots needed speed and altitude, not armor plating. But Grow knew the statistics told another story. Nearly half of all bomber crew casualties came from torso and abdomen injuries. One day, after yet another wave of half-dead airmen returned, Grow had seen enough. He started sketching an idea: a lightweight vest, not full armor, just a layer. It would cover the chest and stomach, protecting the body's vital organs from flying steel. It was simple, practical, maybe even life-saving. But in wartime bureaucracy, simple ideas could be the hardest to approve. Grow's proposal didn't just face skepticism, it was laughed off. Commanders said he was overreacting. "We can't strap metal to our men like medieval knights," one officer sneered. "This isn't the Middle Ages." Weight, cost, logistics. Every excuse was thrown at him. Officially, the idea was denied. Unofficially, Grow refused to give up. Somewhere in the English countryside, inside a small workshop near an airbase, the surgeon began working in secret. He reached out to local steelworkers, men who were used to making aircraft panels, not body armor. Using scrap aluminum and thin steel plates, they built prototypes by hand. Grow tested them quietly, fitting them on volunteers, adjusting thickness, balancing mobility with protection. The first versions were crude, too heavy, too stiff. But he kept refining. He replaced solid steel with layers of overlapping metal plates, thin enough to bend with the body, strong enough to stop fragments. Each vest was a blend of ingenuity and desperation. The tests continued. Crews wore them during practice flights. They reported that yes, it was heavier, but they could move. And when flak hit, the difference was immediate. Fragments that would have torn through a man's chest simply dented the plates instead. Word began to spread. Pilots started asking for Grow's armor. Crews from other squadrons came to him quietly, asking if he could make more. He did, night after night, building vests by hand, with no approval, no funding, and no official recognition. He knew he was breaking the rules. But in his mind, the rules were broken already, because every day, he watched young men die from wounds that could have been prevented. There was one flight in particular that proved it. A B-17 came back from a raid over Bremen, its fuselage shredded, the belly turret blown out. One gunner, wearing Grow's prototype vest, crawled out covered in soot and disbelief. The metal plates were scarred, dented, but intact. Beneath them, his body was untouched. When Grow examined him, he didn't say a word. He just looked at the vest and knew. Still, he was walking a dangerous line. Unauthorized equipment, unapproved modifications. All of it could have cost him his career. But Grow had something far more important than orders. He had proof. He gathered reports, photographs, and testimonies from the men who had survived because of his vests. Quietly, methodically, he began documenting everything. Each story was another piece of evidence. Another reason to fight the system that refused to change. And change eventually did come. But not before Grow would risk everything to push his idea into the heart of military command. And into history. Because what started as one man's, Unauthorized, project would soon transform the safety of bomber crews forever. And save thousands of lives before the war was over. And it all began with a surgeon who saw what others didn't, and decided that sometimes, saving lives means breaking the rules. It didn't take long for whispers about the steel vest to reach higher command. Officers were curious, some skeptical, others quietly impressed. But before anyone could make a formal decision, Dr. Malcolm Grow was summoned. They wanted to know what he was doing. In a tense meeting room, surrounded by polished boots and crisp uniforms, Grow stood in front of his superiors, men who saw war through numbers, not faces. They questioned him sharply. Why had he designed this equipment without authorization? Where was his clearance? Who approved the materials? Grow didn't argue. He simply placed one of his vests on the table and said, "Because it's saving lives." He presented his notes, casualty reports, photos of flak, damaged planes, and medical charts showing where the armor had made the difference. He told stories, not statistics. The gunner, who survived a burst that killed everyone else. The radio operator who came home only because of the dented plates pressed against his ribs. For a moment, the room was silent. Then, instead of punishment, came something unexpected. Interest. The Air Force brass ordered further tests. They wanted results on paper, not just stories. Grow didn't flinch. He organized medical evaluations, combat reports, and field data from dozens of crews. The outcome was undeniable. The steel vests reduced fatal injuries by up to 60%. The news spread fast. Across England, bomber groups began requesting shipments. What had begun as a secret experiment became an urgent necessity. Soon, the 303rd Bomb Group at Molesworth received the first official batch. The men were skeptical at first. Armor meant weight, and weight meant less ammunition, less fuel, or both. But the veterans, the ones who had flown 20, 30 missions, they knew what shrapnel could do. They didn't hesitate. On the next raid over Germany, flak filled the skies like black confetti. When the planes returned, Grow's vests told the story better than any report. Dented metal, scorched edges, fragments embedded like teeth, but no penetration. The men wearing them came home alive. By late 1943, Grow's design, now refined lighter and officially approved, was being mass-produced. The final version used overlapping manganese steel plates sewn into canvas, protecting the chest, stomach, and groin. Each vest weighed about 20 pounds. Heavy, yes, but survivable. They called it the Flak vest. It became standard issue for bomber crews across Europe and the Pacific. Crews wore them during takeoff like a second skin, a talisman of survival. And although not every man returned, thousands did. Because of that invention born in defiance. But the story doesn't end with the vest's approval. Grow wasn't just a doctor, he was a pioneer. Once the vests became standard, he started collecting even more detailed data on aircrew injuries. His studies led to new protocols, better oxygen systems, to prevent frostbite and hypoxia, improved helmets, and heated flight suits. Every piece of equipment the crews used was touched by his influence in some way. He even helped design a reinforced seat armor plate for pilots, a steel barrier behind the backrest that could stop a direct hit from below. Some pilots laughed about it at first, calling it a butt saver. But after a few missions, the laughter turned to gratitude. Many swore they owed their lives to that small, hidden shield. Dr. Gro's approach was revolutionary. Treat prevention like medicine. Don't just fix the wounded. Stop the wounds from happening in the first place. And yet, the true scope of his impact wasn't fully recognized until after the war. By then, bomber crews had flown thousands of missions wearing his unauthorized invention. Reports showed that torso injuries had plummeted across all air forces using the vest. Survivors later described feeling a strange kind of faith in that armor, not because it made them invincible, but because it reminded them someone cared enough to protect them. It wasn't just metal, it was morale. Pilots began calling the vest their guardian angel. Some even painted angels on the inside plates before takeoff. Small acts of superstition mixed with gratitude. For crews facing impossible odds, those thin steel plates represented something far greater than protection. They represented hope. Gro, meanwhile, continued his work quietly. He didn't seek fame. His colleagues said he was the kind of man who preferred to stand in the background while others got the medals. But his name began circulating among commanders as the doctor who refused to wait for permission. Even the British Royal Air Force took notice. They adopted similar armour concepts based on Gro's findings, reinforcing their own bomber crews. Eventually, the design philosophy spread across Allied air forces worldwide. What's even more fascinating is how his early prototypes influenced later generations of body armour. After the war, the US military continued to develop Gro's concept, replacing steel plates with lighter materials, nylon, fiberglass, and later Kevlar. The basic idea, flexible armor protecting vital organs, became the blueprint for modern bulletproof vests. Think about that. Every police officer, every soldier wearing a vest today owes a quiet debt to a surgeon who disobeyed orders in 1943. But back then, Gro didn't know he was making history. He just wanted to stop the bleeding, to give those young men a fighting chance to make it home. And yet, even as his invention spread through the skies of war, there was still resistance, confusion, and disbelief. Many commanders still viewed armor as unnecessary weight. Some airmen refused to wear it, saying it made them feel slower, clumsier, less confident. Others didn't have enough vests to go around, forcing crews to take turns. One flight protected, the next exposed. That inconsistency haunted Gro. He kept pushing for standard issue for every crewman on every mission. Slowly, painfully, bureaucracy caught up with reality. By the spring of 1944, the unauthorized vest had become an official tool of war, the irony. By then, the man who had been reprimanded for breaking regulations was now being decorated for innovation. But for Gro, medals didn't matter. What mattered were the names on his hospital reports, the ones marked survived. Because each of those names represented a son who went home, a family that didn't get the telegram, a life not lost to the sky. And yet, the most powerful part of Gro's story, the one that truly defines his legacy, was still to come. It wasn't about fame or recognition, but about a single, haunting moment that changed how he saw his own invention forever. A moment that revealed the brutal truth about war, survival, and the price of compassion. It was late in the war when the moment came. A cold morning in England, grey skies stretching over an airfield soaked in dew and oil. The bombers were returning from a mission over Berlin, their engines coughing black smoke. One after another, they landed heavy, limping, wounded machines. Doctor. Malcolm Gro stood on the tarmac waiting, clipboard in hand, as he had done countless times before. He watched crews stagger down the ladders, their faces pale with exhaustion, frostbite clinging to their cheeks. Then one plane came in harder than the rest. Its nose gear collapsed, sliding across the field in a shower of sparks. The crew scrambled out, shaken but alive. Paramedics rushed forward, and in the chaos, one man waved a hand toward Gro, yelling, "Doc, you got to see this." Inside the bomber, near the radio compartment, they found the gunner's seat shredded by flak. The vest he'd been wearing, one of Gro's early models, was mangled beyond recognition. The plates had absorbed a direct hit. The man who wore it survived with only bruises. Grow held that vest in his hands silent. The steel was twisted, blackened, and hot. It had done its job perfectly, and in doing so, had saved a man who should have been gone. That was the moment it hit him. For all the charts, data, and reports, this wasn't about numbers. Each dent in that steel was a heartbeat saved. Each scar on that vest was a story that didn't end in the sky. He later wrote in his notes, words that few ever saw, that he believed medicine and engineering had to stand side by side in war. Every life saved, he wrote, is a victory greater than any city taken. As Allied bombers continued to pound Germany, losses remained high, but fewer men were dying from torso wounds. A flak vest had become a silent guardian worn by nearly every crew in the 8th Air Force. By the end of the war, historians estimate that Gro's creation had saved thousands of lives. Thousands. It's a number easy to say, but impossible to fully grasp. Each one was a man who got to see home again. To walk off a plane, write a letter, hold his child. And all because one surgeon refused to accept that dying from shrapnel was inevitable. When the war finally ended in 1945, Dr. Gro was promoted to Brigadier General and awarded the Legion of Merit for his innovation. But true to his nature, he spoke little about it. He returned to the quiet world of medicine, serving his country in new ways, as Surgeon General of the U.S. Air Forces, helping shape modern combat medicine for generations to come. Still, those who knew him said that he often kept one battered steel plate on his desk. The same one from that bomber in 1944, twisted, burned, and dented. A relic not of war's destruction, but of its defiance. He would look at it sometimes and say, "This piece of steel has more humanity in it than most people ever realize." Because in war, compassion often hides in the strangest places. In the hands of a surgeon forging armor, in the courage of a crew who trusts it, in the unspoken bond between invention and survival. The unauthorized vest that started in a backroom workshop went on to shape every generation of protective gear that followed. From the flak jackets of Korea and Vietnam to the Kevlar vests worn today by soldiers and police, its legacy is woven into modern safety itself. And yet, most people have never heard Malcolm Gro's name. He didn't chase fame. He wasn't a general with medals, or a scientist in a lab coat making speeches. He was a doctor, standing in the shadows of war, fighting not for victory, but for the simple right to live through it. When we look back at history, we often remember the heroes who fought, the pilots, the soldiers, the leaders. But behind every one of them, there's another kind of hero. The quiet ones who changed the rules, who refused to accept death as destiny. Gro's story reminds us that sometimes heroism doesn't roar. It whispers. It works after hours, breaks regulations, and welds hope out of scrap metal. And in that whisper, thousands of lives found their second chance. So the next time you see a bulletproof vest, or a soldier walking safely behind armor that bends instead of breaks, remember where it began. Not in a weapons lab, not in a factory, but in a small, hidden workshop in wartime England, where one surgeon, surrounded by blood and loss, dared to believe that even in war, saving life was the greatest act of courage.